All right, good afternoon, everyone. We are recording this session just so that you are aware. We'll get started in a second. We're probably going to wait just a little bit more to see if we get any other attendees. But it's nice to see you all today, and we look forward to presenting to you. Feels like 30 seconds. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Dr. Mitch Hamza. I am one of the advisors at ONSA. My official title is Senior Program Manager for Distinguished Graduate Fellowships. I generally work with graduate students applying to awards such as Fulbright, but I also work with undergraduate students. I did the math today, and this is my 8th Fulbright cycle. So I got started on Fulbright as a graduate student at Purdue University. I was an assistant in the fellowships office in 2017. It was the first fellowship I ever worked on. Really excited to be working on yet another cycle for a really awesome award. And I'll allow my colleague, Dr. Levin, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Levin. I'm a member of the faculty at Barrett, the Honors College. I am also an anthropologist. And Fulbright was the first kind of national scholarship competition that I participated in as an applicant. I did it in between my undergraduate and graduate school. And I, as a Fulbright alum, I really, appreciate the opportunity that I have as the ONSA faculty mentor to work with students and help them polish up and have really effective Fulbright applications. I work with undergraduate and graduate applicants to Fulbright and a couple of other programs like the Critical Languages Institute, Boren, and the Gilman program. So yeah, thanks for coming, and I look forward to telling you how to conceive a study and research project.
Right. And so we are both team members of the Office of National Scholarships Advisement. So the purpose of that office is to provide advisement for students applying to external competitive fellowships, such as the Fulbright U.S. Student Program. Today's focus is really going to be on the Study Research Awards. We'll share a little bit more about the different awards you can apply to in case you're not aware. Just so that you know, I think it was last week, it was last Wednesday, we had our Fulbright Day event, which is a big event in which our director talks more about the award. If you have not had a chance to watch that recording or attend that event, we do encourage you to go on our YouTube channel and and review that event. You'll get a lot of really valuable information there that will help reinforce some of the information that we're giving today, because we're really focusing on the study research projects today. And this is part one of 2 parts. So if you are interested in continuing to pursue a study research award after part 1, in a few weeks, we will have a part 2 where we talk more about writing the application, particularly the statement of grant purpose. So just to give you an overview of the Fulbright U.S. Student Program, it was created in 1946 by Congress. That is very close to the end of World War II, which was in 1945. And so the intention behind this award is to build stronger diplomatic connections between everyday people in the U.S. and across the world. The idea being that we should not just leave ambassadorial work to diplomats, but that by everyday people connecting and learning about each other's cultures, by participating in intercultural dialogue, we can learn a lot more about the world, and we can bring that back into the US and share that amongst our citizens. Just so that you are aware, there are multiple awards with the Fulbright name. And so today we are really focused on the Fulbright U.S. Student Program. So if you plan to work with our office, that is the award you would be applying to. There are other awards out there. There is the Foreign Fulbright Program, which is for international students to study in the US. That's not what we're talking about today. There's also the Fulbright Scholar Program, which is for faculty and people with developed professional expertise go overseas on a Fulbright. So if you have faculty who have been on a Fulbright as faculty, that is probably the award that they have received. Very different from this award. So this award is intended for students who are about to hold or do hold a bachelor's degree to go overseas. You cannot hold a doctoral degree. So it's in that window in which you are holding a bachelor's degree, not yet a doctoral degree. You can fall anywhere in between there, and you don't need to be currently enrolled as a student to apply. And again, it's to fulfill that mission of international exchange, go to a host country, come back into the US, and share what you learned. It is sponsored by the US Department of State and managed by the International Institute of Education. And the mission is to foster mutual understanding between nations. Most of the grants are going to vary from country to country. So if you ask a question about Fulbright in general, if you say, how long can I go overseas? How much is the stipend? We're going to get an answer that we call the Fulbright answer, which is it depends, because things are highly variable between country and country. And so there's a lot of context specific information for Fulbright that is specific to a country and its context. And so sometimes we can't give a universal answer. So sometimes things are going to be a little vague, a little bit variable, just to give you that general overview of what Fulbright is like. But most of the grants are for 9 to 12 months. Most of them start in the fall. So if you apply this fall, your grant would more than likely start next fall, in fall of 2026. Although in the Southern Hemisphere, they have different start dates because their academic year starts at a different date. So for example, if you applied to Australia and got an award, you wouldn't start until February of 2027, generally. So the start dates can vary from country to country. Most are 9 to 12 months, and with the emphasis on 12. They do tend to be a little bit longer than some other study abroad awards. There are over 2,000 grants awarded each year, 4 main types of awards that are available, and we'll review those on another slide. And there are over 140 participating countries that participate in this program. So this is a diplomatic relationship between the US and all the countries that participate, and they invest their own resources, their own time into the success of this award. So it is truly a very unique bilateral exchange. Dr. Levin, do you have anything to add to that? So this is the application timeline for this year. So to give you a sense of why we are presenting to this to you now, as opposed to in August, is because these applications take some time to put together. These are highly competitive opportunities. There can be countries in which 50 students are applying to an award that only has 2 slots. And so in other times, the competition might not be so high in certain countries for certain awards. So another good reason to meet with us, talk with us, is to learn about the competitive nature of the choices that you are making. But we have our Fulbright Day at the end of March. The Fulbright application opened this year on April 1st, so you can go actually onto their website, open up an application, look through the portal, see everything that's required of you. And April through August is where we do, or prefer to do, the bulk of our advising for applicants. And so that's where you can meet with us to do intake meetings, learn more about the award, learn what it's like to work with our office. We do have Canvas materials to help you put together a competitive application. We also provide a lot of advising. So the goal of our job is twofold. Well, it's multifold, but I'm going to say there's 2 main focuses of our job. And the number one is to guide you through your choices. We're not going to tell you what to do and what not to do, except when it comes to writing. We will tell you what to do and what not to do with the writing. But with what countries to apply to or what awards to apply to, those are your choices. We will talk you through the competitive nature of those particular choices, but ultimately we counsel you on making positive decisions that will impact your future, right? And really talking through your choices. The other arm of what we do is we provide a lot of writing feedback. So we all have a lot of expertise with reading these applications. As Dr. Levin indicated, some people in our office have actually applied for this award and received it. But also we have served on review panels, or we have observed review panels. So we do have a lot of expertise, not just with this award, but with many other fellowships. We are also plumbed into a network of fellowship advisors across the United States, where we go to conferences and present on best practices. And we are in constant communication of how to always improve our work as fellowships advisors. So you gain a lot by working with our office on these kinds of applications. So we work with students on drafting, on revising, and we work with them all throughout the summer. The reason that we encourage you to work with us over the summer is that is the best opportunity for you to get a lot of one-on-one attention and to get a lot of focus on your materials. When August comes around, just so that you know, there's a lot of fellowship deadlines in October. This isn't the only thing due in October. And so when August comes around, that's when everyone starts waking up and realizing they have things due in a month and a half. And that we get very, very busy. And so it's much harder. We will work with you, obviously, right? But if you really want that intensive one-on-one time, if you want to take the time to take that step back, move through things, reflect at a slower pace, not do everything in a rush at the end, summer is the best time to do that. Additionally, much, much harder to put together a competitive application when you're binge writing within just a couple of weeks, because you need time to reflect, you need time to work with a faculty mentor on disciplinary specific knowledge, and you need time to work with us. And at any time during those stages, that application can just sit on someone's desk for a little while if they're busy, right? So you need to build in time for other people's busyness and your own busyness, because you all are doing internships and other things over the summer. So once you work with us over the summer, on September 9th will be the ASU campus deadline. This is the first deadline. So we call this the dress rehearsal. So this is where we get the application as close to finish as possible. And then you submit it, not officially. It doesn't go to Fulbright. It comes to our office through the portal. And then we share it with faculty and staff who volunteer to be reviewers. And on September 19th, whoever reviewed your application, a panel of those readers will interview you about your application, ask you questions, and give you suggestions for revision. You will then take those revisions, use them, work with us a little bit more, and then on October 8th will be the final deadline for the national deadline. So that's when we actually submit, send it off, and we wait for forever to get the results. So the results are not announced usually until late spring of the following year. So if you apply this year, you will not know if you receive this award until spring of next year. Dr. Levin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's pretty much, I mean, I'm having lots of meetings with folks now, and I'm able to tell them, you know, this is great because I can really tell you that you can do this at this very kind of relaxed, nice pace. Whereas when we start, working with people in the fall, it's like, okay, get into gear. So it's great that you're at this Fulbright Friday presentation, and hopefully you're also thinking about, starting to do those first appointments with us, and to continue kind of preparing through the summer.
So there are two award types with Fulbright, but one of them breaks down to the three different options. So the two larger things you can do with a Fulbright application is you can apply to teach English overseas. So that's the English teaching assistantship. Just gave a Fulbright Friday on that last Friday. The recording is on our YouTube if you're interested in that option. And then there's the open study research. The open study research is a little bit broader as to what kinds of grants it contains. So there's the Graduate Degree Award, which is for students who want to go overseas and pursue a one-year graduate degree award. So that's either like for a master's program or part of a doctoral program. That's not what we're talking about today. There's going to be a Fellowship Friday on that particular arm of the study research program next week. So we encourage you to attend that if you're interested in a graduate degree. And that's, to clarify, that's not for graduate students. That's for students seeking graduate degrees. And then there's the creative and performing arts. That's part of study research. So with study research, you can just do a general study research. So that's research in the humanities and STEM, social sciences, behavioral sciences, etc. But then the creative and performing arts is if like you are a pianist or a flautist, or you are a photographer and you have a portfolio of mature work that you can share, then you can also pursue a creative and performing arts project through Fulbright. And that's a little bit of a different application. But many of the things that we're going to talk about today will apply to that creative and performing arts application. And then there are country-specific awards. Here's another it depends kind of category. Some countries will have highly specific niche awards. For example, there is a STEM award in Chile where you only conduct STEM research. That's all you can apply with. And so some of those countries are going to have specific awards. So we encourage you to shop around, see what's out there, because with some of those niche awards, they get smaller applicant pools, which means that if it's a good fit for you, it might be something worth considering. And all the Open Study Research Awards do require a statement of grant purpose that is 6,000 characters in length, which is roughly 2 pages. And we're going to go over a lot of the content that needs to be addressed in that statement of grant purpose today. So if you are deciding to apply to Open Study Research, you are responsible for designing your own project, and you typically work with an advisor, sometimes at a foreign university, most of the time at a foreign university or at an institute of higher education. Sometimes it can be an NGO, sometimes it can be a governmental organization, but most of the time students are working with a faculty member or someone at a national lab or something like that. And so these projects can range depending on your field. Sometimes for a graduate student For example, we have someone abroad right now who found someone who designed and implemented a methodology that would be particularly useful for her dissertation. This is like the one person who came up with this. And so she is now in Prague studying with that individual so that she can come back into the US and apply that methodology in her dissertation work. So sometimes it can be a particular aspect of dissertation work or a larger research project like a master's thesis. Many countries do prefer sometimes that it's graduate student research, and they will say this in their country summary. So that is something worth discussing with us and exploring with us. Whether you are or not a graduate student, that is good information for you to know as an applicant. What are their preferences for these kinds of research projects? Other times it can be doing data collection, data analysis overseas, and sometimes students find a position in a national lab. So they find a lab that's doing similar research to what they're doing. It would be a really good research experience for them to go do that, and they apply to work alongside someone in that lab setting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something like a dissertation project or a master's thesis. It can be other kinds of research experiences to help build your credentials as a researcher. So sometimes this is a really good gap opportunity for undergraduates who have some research experience to go and continue to advance that research experience overseas, come back to the US and go and apply to graduate programs, and taking that research experience into their graduate programs. Dr. Levin, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just real quick from my own experience, my kind of advisor was at an NGO in my case, and I was doing kind of qualitative ethnographic research. And this person who had, this is a topic for another day, but had written me a letter of affiliation, kind of supporting my work and inviting me, introduced me to some people in the community that I wanted to do my field work with. And we saw each other occasionally, but I wouldn't say that he was like a huge presence in my life. So this relationship, really varies, and also countries, as Dr. Hobbs has said, have, their own preferences about what kind of institution your advisor is at and what your relationship would look like, right? Do you even have to be in the same city as that person? And something that we at ONSA could help you do if you're not sure about these things is to help you parse what the countries are looking for, so that you're proposing something and looking to get something in place that fits what they're looking for, right? Because we want we want your application to have the best possible chance.
Thank you. So as you're getting started on that kind of project, there's a lot to keep in mind. So you're responsible for a lot of different facets of a well-developed project. We just can't write a statement of grant purpose that says, I'm going to go to Norway and I'm going to conduct some interviews and I'm going to come back to the US and share the results of those interviews with people in the US. Like, we really need to understand what the research question is, what the methods and methodology are behind those interviews, why they're the best choice, how you have the experience to conduct those interviews and analyze the data collected in those interviews, how many people you need to interview to satisfactorily answer your questions. And so there's a lot of details that go into here to show that you can hit the ground running with your project and that you know what you're doing. So the bulk of today's presentation is going to be going through those factors. So just to give you a brief overview of that, the primary criterion when they are judging these projects, when they sit down, reviewers sit down with a 2-page statement of grant purpose, and they're being like, okay, how do I make decisions about the 50 people in my stack? Who's going to go forward? Number one is feasibility. Can this actually be done? Do they believe that the individual who has submitted this application can go out and do what they're proposing to do? And is it something that can be done within the time frame? And is it something that can be done by this particular individual? Do they have the expertise? And there's lots of information you have to share to be able to establish that. And so number one, the reasoning for the location must be compelling, right? You do have to say, like, again, to use that interview in Norway example, why Norway, right? Why am I interviewing people in Norway? What am I trying to learn? How is it a benefit to the people of Norway? How is learning about that particular aspect of whatever I'm interviewing about in Norway a benefit to citizens of the US? Because these are US tax dollars paying for this award, right? So you do have to clearly communicate why that particular location, so it doesn't sound like an applicant took a dart, threw it at a map, and made a decision randomly on where they were going to apply to Fulbright. or they applied in a country that maybe doesn't have as high competition. While that might be a private decision, that's not something that we want to communicate on paper, right? So no matter what, you want to make sure that you have a clear rationale for that particular country, something we can work with you on, right? We do a lot of work with students on digging deeper with that. It should build on your previous knowledge. So this is not the time to change your fields, unless if the fields are related, right? So for example, you wouldn't just want to go, I'm going to go do a psychological study and your background is in literature, right? So your background should make sense with the area of study that you are proposing. There should be some kind of connection. And you should also have some base qualifications, some base experiences you can speak to say why you're going to be successful at this, right? So to go back again to that example of conducting interviews in Norway, having previous experience conducting qualitative interviews that have clear methodological expectations as to what those results are going to be and how those interviews are taken, that is going to be really helpful to establish that that can be done by that particular applicant. It can include, your plans can include academic and language study. So some countries actually do require that students who are there conducting research be enrolled in some academic courses. Sometimes this has something to do with visas and visa status. So sometimes that's a really good reason to read very carefully in the country summaries to see what the expectation is for you, because you might be required to take some coursework, or you might have the option to take coursework, which can also be another compelling reason. Because then you can say, I can do this really cool research project there, and I can take classes with this great faculty and this great program that's a really good fit to advancing my research interest. And that can make a really good argument for fit for you. Also, language study. If you are trying to learn a language, continuing to learn a language that's spoken in the country, there's ample opportunity to do that. And that's something reviewers like to see because that shows engagement with the culture and it shows taking that engagement seriously. You must include community engagement in your application. So you're not just going there, locking yourself up inside a lab and never speaking to anyone. There are expectations that you will have clear, feasible plans for interacting with the culture. You will eat while you're there. Eating the food is not interacting with the culture. You have to eat. That is a fact of life. So that's not quite what they're looking for. What they're looking for is someone to say, I am a fencer. That is something I've been doing for 10 to 15 years. For the institution that I'm proposing to conduct my research at, they have a fencing club. I would like to engage with that club and join them and learn more about what it's like to fence in that country. Sometimes it can be community outreach efforts, but they should be clear plans that draw on previous experience that are feasible and that demonstrate to reviewers that you will go out and interact with people. And it's about interacting with people. So you will be a tourist, you will hike and do other things like that all on your own. They don't want to hear about that. They want to hear how you're interacting with people of the host country, everyday people. It should clearly lead to a next career step for you. So you do need to illustrate how coming back with this information into the US is something you're going to carry forward into a career and share that knowledge with others. That is the main mission of this award. And so it should not just be, I'm on a lark, I have nothing to do next year, don't know what I'm doing with my life, right? That may be true. It's just not what we say on paper. So again, another thing that we help you with is coming up with a rationale of how this all comes together. You may not fulfill those career plans 10 years from now. No one's going to show up on your doorstep demanding their money back. It is not a blood oath. It's just a compelling narrative. And then don't do it alone, right? That's the one thing that we really want to convey to you today. We are here to help you. We have a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise. We are really friendly, and we really try to be as helpful as possible. We are compulsively helpful people. So come exploit that and take advantage of the resources we have in our office to help you. Dr. Levin, do you have anything to add to this?
I want to second the fact that we are very helpful. I also want to second and I can attest to the fact that nobody ever came knocking on my door and demanded to know why I had not done the various things that I claimed I was going to do. But I also want to point out that this, it's deceptively sort of simple, right? It's just 2 pages. But if you are if you're a graduate student, you're like, my research in 2 pages and I have to talk about all this other stuff too. And that's challenging. So I just want to reiterate, give yourself enough time, draw on help from us, because the statement of grant purpose, it's really the heart of your application, and it is it's going to require some time and effort, but we can help you make it good.
Absolutely. It's not just our job, it's our mission, right? So we are here to also fulfill that mission and help you put your best foot forward in these kinds of applications. So Fulbright Research Project. So some things to consider as you're designing that project is that the program design varies from country to country. So this again is one of those, it depends. Some countries will just have a very vague, we welcome applications for study research. And that's it. That's all it says. Other countries will give a laundry list of everything that they're looking for. So they'll say, you know what, we're looking for research on sustainable solar energy. And so if you speak to those particular research interests, well, boy, we know that that could be a good fit for you and that you really need to bring that to the forefront. As I mentioned before, some countries encourage the incorporation of coursework. Others prefer that you do research independently. And they will say in the candidate profile in the country summary what they're looking for. And they will have clear language that says, we are looking for students who can work independently, which means somewhere in that application, you need to establish that you have completed work independently and also talk with your letter writers about, hey, this is something they really care about. If it's something you could mention and speak to, that would be really helpful for this audience, right? So if you've had someone supervise you in an independent research project that you were successful at, having them reinforce that in a letter is a way to help build those credentials with your reviewers and with folks in the host country as well. And then you also want to familiarize yourself with the award description in your host country, which is what I've just been talking about, right? So read through that host country summary, read through it multiple times. Don't just read it one time and go, oh yeah, I know this all, because you will read it differently as you work on the application. There's going to be a lot of really granular details that are a distraction early on, but are something that you need to know later on, right? So when we read these country summaries, think of it as a funnel. We want to get the big ideas first. What kind of research are they looking for? What kind of applicants are they looking for? Are they only looking for graduate students? Can undergraduate students apply here? How many awards are typically given each year? How many people typically apply each year? We want to get that big information first just to wrap our heads around, is this a good fit for you? And then we also want to look at things like the stipend amount and all those other kinds of details. But we want to narrow it down to the more nitty-gritty stuff once we've made a decision. And in our intake appointments, we walk you through how to read these country summaries and how to start making those decisions with the big information first before we get down to the really nitty-gritty details. All right, so a research project needs to be these three things. So they need to be well thought out. And we're going to walk you through in the last half of this presentation what that means. And we're going to do that in some good amount of detail. But it is not something, again, that we write the day before the deadline and submit it and hope for the best, right? First drafts generally do not win with these kinds of competitive applications because you are competing against students who are at other institutions working with offices like ours who have been working on this for months, who are putting their best foot forward as well, right? So these are highly competitive in their nature. And so we really do need to put as much detail in there as possible that is accessible to a broad academic audience. So this is not where we churn in 2 pages of dense jargon where readers just walk into it and go, I have no idea what any of this means because I'm not in this person's field. We do have to make sure that it is understandable to a broad academic audience and that it's clear that you know what you're talking about. You can establish your ethos and credibility as a researcher. It does need to necessitate leaving the US to complete. So if you're going to go conduct those interviews in Norway, it can't be something you can do in the US and ask the same questions of US citizens, right? So there needs to be some necessary component to go outside of the US and conduct this research. And the research activity itself has to necessitate going outside of the country. So for example, if you're like, I'm going to go, to Antigua and write my lit review, they don't want to support that. You can write your lit review in the United States, right? If you need to do your data collection there, that's what they want to see, that it is necessary for you to be there, for you to be working with the citizens of that country, for you to be working with information and requiring knowledge in the host country. And then also they want to make sure that you're engaging with the host country community so that this isn't something that's done in isolation, but it is in some way of benefit to members of the host country. Why do they care about this? Why should this research be conducted there? Why should their tax dollars be helping pay to bring you from the US to go do this? And vice versa. Why is the US paying using our tax dollars to pay for you to go there? How is this a benefit to the US? Dr. Levin, would you like to add anything to that? And then ultimately and finally, your whatever you do with a Fulbright, whether you teach English, try to get a graduate degree, or conduct research or creative arts project, you have to fulfill the Fulbright mission. This is non-negotiable. And that mission is to establish mutual understanding through cultural exchange and cross-cultural dialogue. It is absolutely crucial that you as an applicant can establish that you can do this, right? So the short answer responses you're going to write about your personal background and qualifications, they should establish that you are able to do this, that you will go be a good representative of the United States. I don't know if any of you watched The White Lotus. We want to make sure that we're not sending those kind of people abroad, right? We want to make sure that we're sending good citizens who can represent the US well, who engage well across languages and cultural differences, and are curious about other countries and want to bring that back to the US. So that is the key for any Fulbright application. Dr. Levin?
Yeah, so I'd love to say just a bit more about this because I think that there are specifically for the research, right, this kind of application that we're talking about today. There are a lot of students who want to do research abroad on topics that are controversial or, in various ways critical of developments, right? The rise of the alt-right in Germany, right?
Mm.
So there is a way to do that. And we work with students very hard to make sure that their applications strike that balance of being true to the research they want to do and, their own various, commitments as scholars, but still very much convey that notion of openness and understanding and really, think through it as an exchange, right? Like I'm not there to write bad things about you, you and your country and your government. I am here to learn, and I'm going to do it in a way that is, you know, that is honest and fair and lives up to ethical expectations and all that good stuff. So I think that, I've worked with students who are doing projects that are, really kind of in that critical mode. A lot of research is in that critical mode. And they've had brilliant applications and some, success. We're still waiting, right, to hear about this year's batch of semifinalists, but like some of those students are certainly, waiting hopefully for good news in the next couple of weeks. So just wanted to put that out there. So the next thing we're going to talk about is some key selection factors, right? What are countries looking for in a successful Fulbright open study research applicant? So Dr. Hobbs already talked about this, but the project you're proposing, right? It has to be doable, and it has to be doable in the amount of time that you're going to be there for. Um, so what this looks like in the application is an understanding, being able to lay out a timeline, being able to fill in the details of, how you're going to get from point A to point B, right? How you're going to get from the interview. Yeah, how are you going to get the people to interview? How are you then going to get to the next stage of the next stage when it comes to data? So that's really important. And your academic or professional qualifications, right? This is where you have to really get out of that, oh, I'm just the small bean mode, and really think about all the things that you've done to prepare you to do this work, right? Whether that is your coursework, if you've been a research assistant, if you've had the kind of professional experience that are relevant to this. And really, again, not just put those things out there in like a resume list format, but really make the case and connect them to your ability to do the project. Language proficiency, this, really like Dr. Hobbs has said, right? It depends. This can be, if you're doing an interview project, in a rural area of, a country where English proficiency is not that high to begin with, and you don't speak the host language, well, that's going to be an issue. So you really want to think that through. If you're someone, who has language proficiency, and the language that you have, you maybe are like, oh, maybe I can do research there, right? That is worth thinking about, because language proficiency definitely goes a long way to mutual understanding. Dr. Hops already also talked about community engagement, right? This is not your excitement to go to like one super famous festival or to eat the delicious food, right? You want to dig deeper with this. And it's an opportunity also to, convey things about yourself that are unique to you and that other people applying for the same award, couldn't possibly say, right? So it's definitely an opportunity to think about how you're not just going to be like, some exactly White Lotus character passing through the country, but rather are going to make yourself part of the community that you're joining. Previous experience in the country, they don't necessarily want too much of it for you. But if you have been there before, you know your way around some of the, the geography and the culture, that's great, that's helpful, but I wouldn't say it was absolutely necessary. It certainly wasn't part of my application to go to Azerbaijan. Um, and then they are also looking for, I mean, this is something that Dr. Hops might say otherwise, but this is not within your control, right? Like where you're from or where ASU is or what ASU is. But it is a factor that, sort of from the top down in Fulbright, that they're interested in making sure. They have, a diversity of geographic and institutional, folks from universities and colleges around the country. I think in general for ASU, this usually works in our favor. But again, it's completely out of your control, but it is just a factor. So. Sorry, I thought we were switching off.
Oh, are we switching off? I am sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. So for the validity of the project, they want to make sure that what makes a project valid is that it fulfills these following factors. So they want to make sure that we are reflecting the Fulbright mission, speaking to that mission, that you understand it, right? That should not be something that is inferred or implied. It should be directly spoken to. This will contribute or develop mutual understanding in these particular ways. We don't want to be so obvious about it, like this will fulfill the Fulbright U.S. student program mission. That's too many words, right? We want to make sure that it's concise, it's clear, but they want to know that you understand the mission of the award while you're asking them to the dance, as one of our colleagues, Katie, puts it. And so they want to make sure that you're not submitting an application for another award, another opportunity, that you're not upcycling something that you wrote for the NSF, for example, but instead that this is personalized to this particular opportunity and why this project's a good fit for this opportunity. As we mentioned before, we want to make sure that it's related to your personal and professional goals. So what are you going to do with this experience once it's done? Will it help build on your dissertation? Okay, you're going to go do data collection for your dissertation. Great. What are you doing post-dissertation? What are your career goals after you finish that dissertation? What is the research trajectory after that? And one thing that can be really helpful is to indicate whether there is the potential for the futurity of a long-term research relationship between you and the host country. So if you are an anthropologist studying a particular phenomenon in the Philippines, and that is going to become your research area in the future, then you want to speak to building those relationships now so you can return in the future to continue those relationships. One thing that they're not particularly interested in is parachute research, where a student just comes in, does their research, leaves in a helicopter, and is never seen or heard from again. They have extracted from the population, got what they needed to do what they need to fulfill their own personal agenda, and there will be no benefit to the host community, and the host community will never interact with that person again. They're not interested in those kinds of projects. So the more you can speak to the long-term benefits beneficents of this project to the host country and to the US, and how your career goals will help continue that, the better set you'll be to put together a compelling narrative for this kind of application. Again, why is it best accomplished in this location? With the particular resources, right? So if you want to go and make a film somewhere overseas, what resources are at that institution that you are going to be working with that can support the making of that film, right? And so you also want to speak to what particular resources are in the country that will support this, and also why that particular institution. And resources are not just material resources, it's intellectual resources as well. So this is where your affiliate, the person who you'd be working with, comes in. How is their expertise going to be beneficial from this project? How can you learn by working alongside them to put together a strong, unique project that's a good fit? And then finally, they want to know, is it compelling and timely? The big question we always ask, why does this matter? And we always follow it up with about 6 more whys, because we sometimes ask questions like toddlers. And so we want to know why. Why does this matter? Why is this a benefit? What is at stake? Why is this something that tax dollars should be used to invest in? And so we want to make sure that you're making a really good argument to say, I'm doing this kind of high level theoretical work in linguistics. However, once we have a better understanding of how that functions, we can see and learn this about language, right? And that's a benefit to the country and to the US. So we want to be making good argumentation throughout the application about these different factors to demonstrate the validity of the project and why it is something that should be supported.
Okay, so we've mentioned the centrality of the question of whether your project is doable, right? Feasible. And now we're gonna just talk about this in 2 slightly different ways. So the first way is about project design, the project plan itself, right? What is it? Can a educated non-specialist understand your project from the proposal? That's also sometimes a bigger challenge for graduate students, right? Because they've sort of specialized for so long, and now they need to speak to a much more general reader and make their project plan clear. Is the timeline, workable? Is the methodology appropriate to the host country? That could look lots of different ways, right? Are you going to be able to do the type of interviews you want to do? Are they culturally appropriate for this country? But also, if you're doing something quite technical, right? Is the equipment available, or are you going to be able to bring the equipment that you need with you? So all of those very kind of big and small picture factors in methodology and how feasible it is. And then again, we talked about language already, your training, and your cultural awareness, which is something that you demonstrate throughout your statement of purpose, right? With the way that you talk about, both the research you're going to do and the role you're going to play in the community that you're joining.
Okay, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about the affiliation. So we have been throwing this term around a little bit. This is the person who you're proposing to work with. So again, each country is going to have their own recommendations as to who you can work with and at what institution. Some of them will say you can only work with an academic at an academic institution. Some will say you can only work with people on this list of institutions. And other times they're like, it's your responsibility to find someone, and it has to be convincing. So every country is going to be a little bit different. Universities are the most common, obviously, because sometimes that's what countries prioritize, but also that's where research is being conducted most of the time, right? But there's also research institutes, NGOs, government ministries. If it would be beneficial for you to work with someone at a university and an NGO, because you're doing some kind of project that synthesizes those perspectives, you can do that. You can have up to 3 affiliates. The primary affiliate, the first letter you're going to upload in the portal and say, this is the primary person I'm working with, that should be whoever meets the country's qualifications. So if they say you must work with an academic, that first person better be an academic. But you can also work with an NGO as slot 2 or slot 3, even if it says you can't use an NGO as your primary one, because your primary one meets their qualifications. So you can have up to 3 affiliates for many different venues, and a strong letter from them will outline in-country resources available, what they can do to support the project, why it's a good fit for their institution and the resources they have available. And these requirements are going to vary from country and grant type. So some countries just say we need a letter. Other countries will say we want these particular details addressed in this letter. And so you do want to read that carefully, share that information with whoever is writing that letter. And the other thing I'll add, you want to start researching who your affiliates could be early on in the process. But over the summer is when we start finalizing that, because you don't really want to start making contact until you have a good idea of what the research project is. Sometimes, if the idea isn't substantial enough, you might not get a response, or you might get a no. Whereas if you took a little bit more time to be able to explain that idea, we can get better success with landing a yes. And we walk you through this entire process and help, we can even look over your email you're going to send the person, right? So we'll help you with every step of the way. This is one thing that we help you with, something to be aware of.
Okay. So you should have the adequate formal training, right? Like, what does that mean exactly? A bit difficult to absolutely pin down, but you should be able to, in your letter, make a convincing case that you have the training you need to do the research you're proposing, right? And again, that's part of that is being the ability to communicate about that research clearly and to a non-specialist audience. Part of it is just being able to say, like, okay, here's how I got the training that I need that prepares me for this project. Again, whether that's through coursework or through lab experience, internships, etc. So that's important. Your GPA, I just, I don't want anyone to count themselves out, because I think it's such a small factor in the grand scheme of things. And it's really, it's truly a holistic, the review of it is truly holistic. I think that if there have been bumps along the road that are reflected in your GPA, it's something that you might want to address in other parts of your application, so people aren't sort of left questioning, like, oh, like, why did that happen? But it's definitely not a reason to count yourself out if you don't feel like your GPA is like way up there. But as this says also, like, if you have a trend of improvement, that helps a lot. You're going to be in an applicant pool for a certain amount of spots for a particular country with people at different degree levels. There's only so many spots, and there's not spots that are, reserved for particular degree levels. As far as we know, maybe at the country level, there is some of that going on. But don't also feel like you're being compared because to people at different degree levels, right? They don't expect somebody who is proposing a project after their undergraduate to have the same kind of project as a person who is in the midst of their PhD research. And the national screening committees, though, are instructed and well instructed to compare applicants to their peers. So, like, where you are in your educational journey. So, and again, that's something that's not within your control, but we want to make your application the best that it can be for your degree level.
Right. So next we're going to talk about language proficiency and how that fits into your qualifications. So language proficiency is another one of those things that's going to be highly variable between countries. Some countries are going to have a minimum level of proficiency that they expect. That can be at a novice level or a beginner level. It can be at a more advanced or intermediate level. It depends on the country and whether there's the reasonable expectation one can become an advanced user of that language in the United States. Some other countries don't have similar expectations. So they say, it doesn't matter whether you speak the language or not. However, for the research project, keep in mind that your language usage must be commensurate with what you're planning to do. So you probably, if you don't speak the language of, if you don't speak Norwegian, probably going to be hard to go to Norway to conduct interviews, right? And so you want to make sure that there's a good fit between what you know about the language and the project that you are implementing. You also want to be able to make sure that you are able to communicate with the people of the host country. If you don't know the language, outline plans to try to learn the language while you're there. That helps demonstrate intellectual curiosity. And if you do know other languages, you can speak to that as ways that can help prepare you to learn other languages. It shows that you are serious and committed to learning about other cultures and languages. In many cases, having conversational ability is a big plus because it allows you to engage with the host country. And some countries do ask that you fulfill a foreign language evaluation, right? So for Japan, you do have to have a very strong background with Japanese. They want to see an evaluation by an expert who says this is where the student is with their Japanese. So just to finalize with the big point here, you can't fudge this. So if they are asking you to demonstrate a certain level of proficiency at the application deadline, you will have to submit documentation evaluated by a professional that that's where you're at. And every country summary will have descriptions of what they're looking for with language proficiency.
Indeed. Although sometimes those descriptions, again, require some help parsing.
Absolutely.
So engagement with with the host country community, right? This is outside of your grant activity, but can be related to it, right? Like if you're doing a project that's related to public health, and your engagement with the community that you're proposing is a series of presentations at a community center around a topic in public health, right? But the point of this engagement is that it's not for you, it's for you to give back to your community. And that could be by sharing, some expertise that you have. So reviewers are interested in hearing really, kind of well thought out, also feasible, right? So, yes, if you are talking about it at a community center, then that's, and you can provide some details about how you would, locate that, how you would get that going, great. But if you're saying, I'm gonna talk to the president about this, right? Then you haven't really thought this through. So you definitely want to think about feasibility for community engagement as well. And just evidence that you're a thoughtful person who is, service oriented, right? Because you're going to be getting a lot of benefits out of this grant, and you want to be clear that you understand that puts some obligation on you as well. In this community engagement, there are short responses that will ask directly about this, and it can also be something where the folks who are writing letters for you could talk about it, right? You can give them information to fill them in so that they can effectively talk about that in their recommendations. And then the CCE is the campus something evaluation. I forget. Campus committee evaluation, I believe. And that's, Dr. Hopsa talked about kind of our endorsement day on September 19th. That's where you'll talk to the campus committee for your country or your region. And this will be just one of the things that they can bring up as well. It's good to have, different sort of sources, from different parts of the application on this, to just generally show that you're serious about community engagement.
I'll keep the next one brief. And this is one of those things, talk to us about this. I want to give a big caveat about this. So with previous experience, whether or not you have previous experience in the host country, whether that matters will vary from country to country. In many cases, Fulbright prefers applicants who have less in-country experience. However, that does not count studying abroad, being there for military service, etc. So for example, if someone lived in Germany for 4 years, they lived and studied in Germany for 4 years, and then they came back to the US and now they're applying to a Fulbright in Germany, they might not be that excited about supporting that person and might want to send someone who does not have as much experience of being in Germany. Maybe someone who was on a study abroad trip there for 6 weeks. This will vary from country to country. Sometimes countries actually do have a preference that someone have previous experience in their country because it means they know the language, they know the culture, particularly if you've interacted with particular communities before that you're going back to communicate with. And again, this will vary if you are, again, let's use that example of the anthropologist studying a particular culture. If that's the only place you can study that cultural phenomenon, there's not much else that you can do and go do that elsewhere, right? So this will vary, but Fulbright overall has a mission to support US citizens who may not have had similar opportunities or extensive opportunities in that particular country before. But you can have an advantage depending on the country. Always something to talk with us individually about in an intake appointment. They are, Dr. Levin, sorry, I jumped in.
Great. So again, this came up before briefly, and I won't spend more than a couple of seconds on this, right? These are things that you can't control. You can't control what you've studied up until now because that you've done that already, and these other things, right? You can't control. But just so you know that Fulbright is looking to, um, you know, as part of this cultural exchange and this, kind of citizen diplomacy, they are looking to send people from all over the US, from all sorts of institutions, right? From community colleges all the way to the Ivies, to, represent the US abroad. But I think interesting also, if you're thinking of, you're in a field of study that's maybe less, commonly associated with international opportunities, that could actually be a great advantage for you, because those, the national screening committees will see that and be, really interested to see what kind of project you're proposing, and what you could bring to it and how they could get someone from your field of study out into, the world, wherever you want to go for a Fulbright.
So for the next couple of slides, because we do want to get to the Q&A before 1 o'clock and be respectful of your time, all these questions can be found on the Fulbright website. So if you skim over these questions now, you'll get a sense of what questions they want to see answered in that 2-page statement of grant purpose. So these are the questions that are going to address validity. Then there's going to be questions about feasibility. And then there's also questions about your qualifications and goals. So all the advice that we're giving you today draws from the kinds of questions that they have on their website that they want to see answered in that 2-page statement. We are always happy to go over those questions with you individually and talk about how to answer those questions. But that's a starting point. So if you go to the website, look at the application components for study research, you'll find those questions and you can start answering them on paper to start developing your ideas. So that's where I encourage students to start, is with the questions that we just showed on the last slides. If you are interested, make sure that you attend our next Fulbright Friday webinar on study research. It's at the end of April, so we have a couple weeks of a gap, or couple gap weeks here. There's other presentations. Next week is grad degree, and you can see all of that on our website, onsa.asu.edu, and you can also make an intake appointment for each of the 3 different award types. Here are more resources, and we are happy to try to start answering your questions, although I know Dr. Levin does have to leave at 1, but I can stay a little bit later if other people have some burning questions.
And I hope that some of you will consider making an intake appointment to start really digging into your particular interests and projects. So I hope to see you at one of those appointments in the coming weeks. Thanks.
We're always excited to hear about what you all are doing, because you all are always doing such interesting research. All right, well, thank you. You're welcome, Cece. Thank you for joining us today. So what questions? Do you have any questions, everyone? Bye, Dr. Levin. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, you know where to find us. Those questions can be answered in an appointment. It was good to see you all today. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to meeting you and learning more about your research and how Fulbright can help support that research. Please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you soon.